I think we can start the meeting 2 more minutes, right? Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Unwaste webinar. We are going to wait a couple of more moments. There are still people who are trying to connect, and we are going to start very shortly. Thanks for joining. I think we can start if everyone's ready. Elena, Elise, Florian? Yes, okay. Again, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. My name is Ioana Cotuțiu, and I'm project coordinator of the Unwaste project for UNODC. And if you attended our previous webinars, we are regularly inviting experts specialized in different issues related to waste and waste trafficking to talk about their experience, about their projects. And today we have the pleasure to host UNITAR, the Sustainable Cycles program, who are a leader on global research and discussions on sustainable management strategies for electronic waste. In this webinar, they will share results from global regional e-waste monitors with a special focus on Southeast Asia. They will also present their global Transboundary E-Waste Flows Monitor from 2022, their latest publication. And I'm really pleased to introduce our speakers for today. The first speaker will be Elena D'Angelo. She joined UNITAR Sustainable Cycles in 2016, and she worked with the UN since more than 20 years, where she developed in-depth knowledge of issues related to illicit transboundary movement and management of waste, including e-waste, as well as knowledge related to circular economy and transnational organized crime. Elena was involved with SCYCLE in coordination research activities of EU-funded projects dealing with waste trafficking, and there are so many of them. I'm not going to go to name them all, but Waste for Strike project is also an waste project. She's also responsible for the SCYCLE training strategy for UNITAR. Before joining UNITAR SCYCLE, Elena worked as project analyst at United Nations Institute on Crime and Justice in Geneva and Turin, UNU Keys, and was a senior researcher of research centers on security and crime. Our second speaker is Elise Vermeersch. She started working on environmental and waste issues with UN 2013 and joined a SCYCLE team in 2016. She's involved in research, data collection, analysis, and capacity building activities regarding monitoring of e-waste and other natural resources. And over the past year, she contributed as well, the same as Elena, to numerous projects led by SCYCLE. I'm going to give them the floor to talk about the project. Please go ahead, Elena and Elise, and thanks a lot for joining us today. We cannot hear you, Elena.
You are muted still.
Of course, I was muted. Thank you, Jana, for the introduction, and thanks UNODC for organizing this webinar and for inviting SCYCLE. I'm going to share my screen now. Let's see if it's working properly. Can you all see my screen?
Yes,
I think
all
so.
good.
Okay, super. Okay, so as mentioned already by Ioana, with my colleague Elise, we will be sharing with you the main results of one of our latest study on monitoring global transboundary e-waste flows. So during my presentation, I'd like to have some interaction also with you, with the audience, and I will be using Mentimeter. I guess most of you are familiar. I'd like to make like a quick test, so you can try and connect to menti.com, simply typing on your browser menti.com and including this code, or you can also use the QR code. Okay. So once you manage to enter Menti, I'd like you to type into Menti simply your country of origin, so that I can have an idea of the composition of the audience. Super. Thailand, Nepal, Indonesia, perfect. But also Slovenia, the Philippines. Very good. Okay. Thailand is getting bigger, so we have more representatives. Very good. So it's very good. As you know, the Unwaste project is definitely focusing on flows from Europe to Southeast Asia. So it's really great that we can have representative from both regions and both parts of the world. Okay, a few more seconds to allow everyone to test Menti. I think we are good. Okay, super. So let me first give you an idea of who we are. Joanna already kindly introduced Elisa and myself. We are part of the Sustainable Cycle program under UNITAR. Maybe some of you already knew Cycle because we were previously under another UN Research Institute, the United Nations University. And now we had this transition and we are fully under UNITAR. This is our vision. Let me read it for you. The vision of SCYCLE is really to enable societies to reduce the environmental load of production, including but not limited to the use and disposal of EEE, meaning electrical and electronic equipment, and bring it to sustainable levels through independent, comprehensive and practical, so applied research, providing facts for a more thorough policy development and decision making. In this slide, you have also an overview of, let's say, some of our main activities. One big component, indeed, SCYCLE is the lead actor in quantifying e-waste flows at global and regional level. You might be familiar with our global and regional e-waste monitors. Since a few years, we are also conducting national studies, developing then statistics on mainly on e-waste flows. But let's say in recent years, we have also expanded our field of research also to other type of waste streams. For instance, we are working on developing plastic inventory toolkits. We also had, just as an example, the project Person in Port, where we try to estimate and quantify flows of e-waste carried in vehicles, mainly going from Europe to Western Africa. Then we have all our capacity building and trainings program. We have our e-waste academies, both for managers and for scientists. We have our academies on environmental crime, so focusing on how to counter illicit management of e-waste. And we do organize with national authorities workshops to develop, gather, and analyze e-waste statistics. Of course, as a UN body, we also have a component dealing with policy advice. We are part of a number of partnerships and coalition like the UN E-Waste Coalition and the Global E-Waste Statistics Partnership. In this slide, I just wanted to summarize the projects that Joanna was referring to also in her introduction. So SCYCLE has been actively working on applied research on waste crime since 2013. These are the main projects where we have been involved. If you are interested also in, in knowing more about this topic, especially on the latest projects, Waste Force and Strike, you can still find online the website with a lot of materials uploaded, webinars recorded, trainings, courses recorded, and the number of training materials and reports uploaded, so you can easily have a look. And of course, we are now also part of the Unwaste family and Unwaste research group. And these are just a few images I wanted to share from our latest experiences. One training for customs we had in Tanzania recently, and the very last Academy for Scientists. I saw some familiar faces also in the participants. We were all in Limerick a couple of weeks ago. So let's go now into the main topic of this webinar. So as mentioned, I'd like to share with you first from a global perspective the results of this report on monitoring transboundary e-waste flows that we recently published last June, also in the occasion of the conference of parties of the Basel Convention, while my colleague Elise will then focus rather on the Southeast Asian situation. So what's the objective of this report? two main objectives. First, we wanted to improve the existing estimates on the transboundary movement of e-waste, but also improving the data on loss value of mismatched e-waste at global level, with the idea that monitoring transboundary movement of e-waste can indeed help in better understanding and estimating both the licit and illicit flows of e-waste globally, and including the valuable components embedded in e-waste. A few words on the methodology and the main data sources we used. For what concerns data related to e-waste generation and e-waste recycling at global level, we refer to our global monitor that you might know, the most recent one published in 2020. Let me also share with you that this report is giving a picture of the situation of transboundary movement of e-waste in 2019. Of course, our objective is to let's say, develop a series of these monitors, because of course, developing estimation in a range of time can allow better estimating the trends, and also to make some predictions to some extent. But this is limited, let's say, to 2019. Then when we refer to transboundary movements, we refer to both controlled and uncontrolled movements. Under the controlled movements of e-waste, we refer mainly to hazardous waste traded under and shipped under the peak procedure of the Basel Convention, but also we looked at PCB waste. So when I will mention PCB, I'm referring to printed circuit board waste, as they are one of the most valuable components of e-waste. And these are referred to as control movements simply because they are duly recorded and reported. On the other side, when we refer to uncontrolled movements, we refer to all those flows of both e-waste but also use EEE that are not controlled, which means that the final treatment is not known. So they might be illicit still to some extent, but also illicit. And we also analyze a smaller component of e-waste carried in used vehicles. But I must say that this type of phenomenon doesn't really concern specifically Southeast Asia or the Asian region, but rather the African continent. So again, on the methodology, you all probably know that when we refer to e-waste, we refer to different definitions. So different countries can have different definition, because the fact of discarding an electronic component with the intent of not reusing it in some countries is already considered waste, in other countries cannot be considered waste. But for the purpose of this study, when we refer to e-waste, we refer to the categorization under the EU WE directive. So the 6 main categories. At the same time, this is you can find a clear explanation of this in the statistical guidelines on e-waste that SCYCLE developed, because SCYCLE developed this product categorization under what is called 54 UNU Keys. So basically all type of e-waste are grouped into these 54 categories, and they are grouped based on a number of categories, which means they have similar functions, similar end-of-life characteristics, similar life time distribution, and also comparable material composition. And this is an internationally recognized, let's say, product categorization that has been used also in other studies of this kind. Okay, now let's go to Mentimeter. So I'd like to ask you whether you are familiar, whether you know what is the quantity of e-waste that was generated per capita in 2019, this at global level. So do you know whether we generated like 1.2 kilograms or 7.3 or 10 kilograms per capita? Let's see whether you read the global e-waste monitor. So 7.3 kilograms is receiving Yes. Okay. Okay. So while others are still voting, I can spoil and I can confirm that indeed it's 7.3 kilograms per capita, the US generation in 2019, which means that this number was the total amount of e-waste generated globally, 53.6 metric tons. So my next question is, according to you, out of this total 53.6 metric tons, what is the percentage documented to be collected and duly recycled? So out of the total e-waste generated, how much do you think at global level, let's say as an average, was duly recycled and collected? So someone is say 5%, someone is more optimist, 17. No one is that optimist to say more than 50%. Okay, let's give a few more seconds to let others replying, but yeah, I can see you are pretty much familiar with the global monitor indeed. Yeah, no, I'm afraid it's not 52.5%, unfortunately. So let me go to the next slides where you can find the answer to my previous questions. So as we said, in 2019, at global level, we generated 53.6 metric tons of e-waste. Out of these, only 17.4% global e-waste was documented to be collected and properly recycled. What does it mean? That the remaining 82.6% of global e-waste flows are not documented. So they are likely dumped or shipped, we will see, or recycled in a non-environmentally sound way. That of course can create, you can imagine the level of harm that this can create on the environment and the human health. And at the same time, the fact of not duly collecting and recycling this amount of e-waste, of course, is also related to a potential loss from an economic point of view. This is the value, 57, so almost 60 billion USD. It's the potential value of the analyzed raw material embedded in waste. So this is what we are basically losing by not recycling correctly what we generate in terms of e-waste. And you can see, we can expect, of course, that this problem is going to increase, simply because you can see the estimates here that in 30 years, now less than 30 years, the amount of global e-waste generated is going to be almost double, even more. Now, why do unmanaged flows of e-waste increase? Well, as you can, of course, imagine, this is linked to the increasing volumes of e-waste, which is also linked to the increasing use of EEE at global level. On the other side, there is still a lack of specific regulation or legislation, keeping into consideration that only 29%, so one of the population, so 1 person out of 3 persons in the world is covered by a specific e-waste policy or legislation. Then in a number of countries, and especially least developed countries, there are still limitations of e-waste management infrastructure, so they cannot manage and properly treat the amount of e-waste generated or imported. There is still a competition between the formal and the informal sector to extract valuable fractions from e-waste, and this will be also further discussed by my colleague Elise with regard to the situation in Southeast Asia and Asia more in general. There is, of course, there are issues and challenges related to the import and export of legal and illegal e-waste. Why this? Because probably one of the main modus operandi when sending illicit shipments of e-waste is simply to mix e-waste either with used EEE or declared used EEE, or for instance with other types of waste like household waste without declaring them in the shipping documents. Now, I'd like now to really share and present the results on the estimate of the transboundary movements. So we already say that globally we generated 53.6 metric tons, and only the 17% was duly recycled. Let me go next. And so out of the 17% duly recycled, you can follow this arrow and you can see that only 1.8 metric tons consist in controlled transboundary movements. You remember the distinction I made at the beginning between controlled and uncontrolled. So 35% of the total transboundary movements globally is composed by hazardous waste duly declared under the peak procedure of the Basel Convention or PCB waste. On the other side, 3.3 metric tons are uncontrolled transboundary movements. So 65% of the total e-waste moved at global level are not recorded, are not declared. As I said, they can be mixed, for instance, with other legal shipments for disguising purposes. And also one of our findings is that licit and illicit methods may also overlap in shipping. So here you have the total. In 2019, 5.1 metric tons correspond to the total transboundary movement of e-waste. So it is almost 10% of the total global e-waste generated. One last comment on this number on the bottom of the slides. This is based on data from the SWIP project in Europe, which refers to data of seized illegal e-waste exports. So according to what has been declared by inspector at European level, this is like a very small number, from 2 up to 17 kilotons is the amount of e-waste seized, which means they are blocked, they are detected, and they are seized. Of course, as you can imagine, this is only the tip of the iceberg. So, and this is only referring to Europe. So we can have an idea of how much the extent of the problem could be. And of course, inspection authorities, they don't have the capacity to inspect and detect all the cargoes, the shipments going around the world every day. So this is why this is a small number, but it's only the tip of the iceberg. We did the similar exercise with printed circuit boards waste, PCB waste, simply because they are one of the, as I mentioned before, the components of e-waste with a high value fraction, because they contain gold, they contain copper, they contain raw materials with a high value. And indeed, if we look at how much is duly collected, both by the formal and the informal sector, this corresponds more or less to 1/3 of the total PCB waste generated in 2019. But if you look at the percentage of PCB duly collected, this is almost double. You remember the 17%? Here we have 34%. So of course, there is a lot of value that can be extracted by this from this component. They are moved at transboundary level, and also for another reason, because there are few, let's say, companies with enough capacity to treat correctly. So basically, PCB waste are mostly sent to Western Europe, where the big smelters are located, to North America, but also to Eastern Asia. This will be also mentioned in the second part of this presentation. Of course, you can imagine that this can also be related to what we call a high risk of cherry picking. So especially when we refer to the informal sector, like printed circuit board are maybe extracted by the informal sector and then shipped to countries, to companies that can properly treat the PCB waste. But on the other side, there most likely there are no resources or money left to treat the other hazardous components, and this can be, of course, a problem for the environment and for the human health. So in terms of transboundary movement, the total amount is 0.36 metric tons. As I was mentioning, these are mainly exported to those regions in the world where the big smelters are located. In this map, I just wanted to show you, you can of course read and better consult the map on the report, but this is just to show you some of the main hubs for the three main components of transboundary movements that I mentioned at the beginning. So we have uncontrolled movements of e-waste and used EEE, and then we have controlled movements of hazardous e-waste and PCB. If we have a look, for instance, at the Asian region, you can easily see that Eastern Asia is mainly importing hazardous waste, but also PCB, also because there are a number of manufacturing sites in the region, while Southeast Asia is rather importing, but also exporting uncontrolled e-waste. While in Europe, indeed, you have this big blue and green spot for imports of controlled, mainly controlled e-waste, but they are also exporting. And we know that a big part of uncontrolled e-waste are going to the African continent, including Western and Northern Africa. And maybe another interesting thing to mention, let me also check the timing, is I don't know if you can see in my screen, but basically you can see that in Asia, the level of total import and export is quite balanced, even though there are rather more imports than exports. But if you look at Africa, while there is only the capacity of managing and recycling 1% of the total e-waste generated, they are also importing like 20%, so 4 times more than the total exported. So you can imagine the burden that can be at regional level to then treat and manage correctly the total e-waste received. Okay, and this is just a map of flows. Maybe I can simply again showing you and maybe just commenting on the uncontrolled flows, just to show you that, for instance, in Southeast Asia, this will be further explained by Elise. There is still like level of intra-regional trade, but Southeast Asia is also receiving from Northern America, but also from Eastern Europe and Western Europe to some extent, and then yeah, also receiving from Eastern Asia. One very last comment. As you can imagine, let's say hazardous e-waste represent those e-waste with the lowest value, simply because due to the high level of hazardous components, the treatment costs much more, while the PCB are those with the highest value because of the raw materials they contain. And from these graphs, you can see how usually the highest value e-waste are those which are mostly shipped at a transnational level, even though one of, let's say, our main results is also that there is a kind of an escalation, an increase of intra-regional trade. This is due to a number of factors, and is also due to the changing situation at global level. With the post-pandemic world, the escalations due to some geopolitical, just to mention, of course, the war between Russia and Ukraine, and the effects that this is having on the prices of fuels and energy. All these factors, let's say, may bring to an even more intra-regional waste trade taking place, meaning that we expect a kind of increase of intra-regional trade rather than dealing with high cost of shipping, in this case, e-waste to other continents. So I would stop here, and I think I can now give the floor to my colleague Elise, who will delve into the actual situation of e-waste flows in the Asian continent and in Southeast Asia. And we have some space for Q&A later on. Thank you for the moment.
Thanks a lot, Elena, for passing on the floor, and thank you, Joanna, for the presentation. Good morning or good evening to everyone, and thanks a lot for your participation to this webinar. So yes, after looking at the global trends on the next slide, Elena, if you can go there, you can see, I don't know if you are changing the slide, Elena. I don't see them changing for now.
It's not working for some reason. It worked
okay.
until... Okay,
Yeah,
it's working.
perfect, thank you. That's working now. So here you can see the main statistics about Asia in general and Southeast Asia more specifically. And we will detail those in the next slide. But first, overall, we can see that all the regions of Asia are impacted by uncontrolled flows, so the red arrows, as explained earlier by Elena, and that most of the transboundary movement, whether legal and illegal, can be observed around East Asia and Southeast Asia. Maybe if you can go back quickly to the previous slide. Yeah, thank you. And an interesting point concerning transboundary movements between countries is that the total number of export and total number of import are quite close, as mentioned earlier. And indeed, the region is importing around 2.8 kiloton of waste, just slightly more than its export of 2.5 kilotons. So going to the next slide, Asia is generating 24.9 metric ton of e-waste annually, with 561 kiloton of PCB. And only 2.9 metric ton of e-waste are actually documented as being treated in environmentally sound facilities, which represent 12% of all e-waste and around 17% for PCB specifically. So what does this mean? It means that the remaining 22 metric ton or 88% of e-waste generated are not managed in an environmentally sound manner. So this low level of good management is mainly due to the lack of e-waste management and infrastructure, and the presence of the informal sector, which is in competition with the formal one for valuable component, as already highlighted by Elena. And indeed, the problem is that formal actors hardly get access to the most valuable component and to the quantity needed for the treatment and recycling, which can, of course, greatly impact their activities and the economic opportunities. So as previously mentioned, Southeast Asia and East Asia are primary import and export hubs. If we go to the next slide, we can see that in East Asia, imports accounts for around 1 metric ton and exports for around 0.9 metric ton, while in Southeast Asia, imports are approximately 1.1 metric ton and export around 1 metric ton. So more precisely on Southeast Asia, in 2019, the region imported 1,139 kiloton of e-waste and used EEE, of which around a bit more than 700 kiloton were hazardous e-waste imported under the PIC procedures, so the prior informed consent procedure of the Basel Convention. 180 kiloton were undocumented e-waste or used EEE, and around 118 kiloton were high-value components, especially, as mentioned, printed circuit board waste. The imported e-waste and used EEE correspond to 32% of the e-waste generated in the region. And actually, data reveal an emerging phenomenon of this intra-regional trade of e-waste in the Asian continent. And as said, we can expect these trends to become even more familiar for Asia and the rest of the world. Going to the next slide, we can see that ASEAN region is a significant hub of EEE production, which also impacts the movement of electronics and of their waste. So the EEE production contributes to $268 billion to regional gross domestic product, GDP. It employs more than 2.4 million workers and it accounts for the largest share of the ASEAN total exports, around 27%. If we go to the next slide, I don't know if it is working. It's not from my side. Yes, it is. So what about the main challenges in Southeast Asia region and in East Asia? So in East Asia, as environmentally sound e-waste management infrastructure and most e-waste import are controlled. So this is for East Asia. But this region exports quite a high level of uncontrolled e-waste to Southeast Asia and Southern Asia. I'm sorry, it's a bit complex to talk about this sub-region of Asia, but I hope you can follow in a good way. So the recipient countries in the Southeast Asia and Southern Asia do not have the treatment capacities to treat the e-waste in a ESM way, so environmentally soundly, when it becomes e-waste. And those imports place a significant burden on the environment, and they may lead to the losses of valuable resources. So it's really an issue in terms of environmental and health, but also in terms of economics. And those uncontrolled flows from East Asia to Southeast Asia follow the same, of course, driving factors as from other regions, like between Europe to West Africa. So we talk mainly about the demand for second-hand electronics, the lower cost for processing, disposing, and dismantling. Going to the next slide, another issue that we can mention is that Southeast Asia, for example, in Singapore, similarly to North Africa, for example, Egypt, is an emerging hub for re-exporting e-waste. So the region is kind of used as transit country or region, and it is actually difficult to assess how much waste stays in the country and how much is re-exported. Another point is that researchers suggest that there is possible intra-regional trade of low quality or counterfeit EEE. And another trend is that the effect of the so-called China ban affected e-waste, as the main imports have shifted from China to countries in Southeast Asia, including Malaysia, Vietnam, and also Thailand. If we can go to the next slide, please. So Southeast Asia sends the most valuable parts, so as we mentioned, printed circuit board waste, back to manufacturing countries in East Asia for recycling of mainly precious metals and copper as secondary raw materials. Treatment facilities in East Asia also receive printed circuit board waste from Western Europe and North America. So we see it's not only going one way, it's actually also Southeast Asia is also exporting to East Asia the most valuable part, because they do not have in-house the capacity to treat them properly. And going to the next slide to conclude my presentation, just a few words on the main trend in Europe, because the Unwaste project is really looking also at the transboundary movement between the EU to the Southeast Asia region. For Europe has the highest rates of environmental sound collection and recycling of e-waste worldwide, with 42% collection out of the 12 metric ton e-waste generated, and up to 61% of collection when it comes to PCB waste. But Europe is both an export and import hotspot for controlled e-waste and uncontrolled used EEE and e-waste movement. Indeed, 1.8 metric tons are exported as compared to 1.2 metric tons of imports, making Europe a net exporter as such. A well-developed e-waste management infrastructure exists in the European Union, but costs for compliant e-waste collection, e-waste treatment and disposal in the formal sector in Europe are substantially higher than a non-compliant treatment and recycling. And this can really lead to the export of illegal export of e-waste. And all regions in Europe show uncontrolled export of used EEE or e-waste, and it's a total of 1.3 metric ton, which is estimated to be illegally exported. So overall, Western Europe is one of the main exporters of uncontrolled used EE or e-waste, together with East and Southeast Asia, actually. And Western Europe exports roughly 0.6 metric ton of this used EE or e-waste, primarily to West Africa, Eastern Europe, but also, as mentioned, to Southeast Asia and partly to North Africa. So this gives you a bit of an overview of the main numbers and statistics and data that was collected and analyzed in the monitor. And I hope all those numbers were not too difficult to grasp. And I really invite you to read the report and contact us in case of any question. And of course, now we will have also a few minutes for Q&A and for further discussion. And we are also happy to hear from you if you have any inputs to bring to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Elena and Elise, for this very interesting presentation. A lot of numbers, a lot of facts, and a lot of data, all presented in a very accessible way. But of course, all these materials will be available on the Mobilize platform for you to consult afterwards if you want to go back to the materials. Right now, we can take some questions. Nancy, I don't know if you made a comment in the chat, if you want maybe to clarify that before we are taking other questions. You can raise your hand or you can put your question in the chat. Please go ahead.
No, I just wanted to clarify that the data from LiveSweep project are not referring to seized shipments. It's just referring to controls that have been carried out by various entities, and and in those cases where an offense or non-compliance case was found, it's been recorded in the data, but it doesn't mean that these have been shipments that have been seized by customs, because those are two different things. Sorry.
No, thank you, Nancy, for this clarification. But actually, we did this extraction with together with Katie from SWEEP. So this is an actual estimate of seized e-waste. So it's referring to seized one. It doesn't mean that it's referred to all the data from SWEEP, but we asked Katie to make this because it was done in the QUIT project, and indeed the numbers are more or less the same. So with together with Katie, we did an extraction from 2019, and she referred to this range from 2 to 17 kilotons, only referring to seized e-waste. So it's true what you're saying, but in this case, let's say it's a further analysis of the data from SWEEP.
Okay.
Just to very clear.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for clarifying questions. You can also, if you want, you can turn your camera on or raise your hand, whatever, or put a question in the chat, whatever you think it's more suited for your connection.
In case, Joanna, we also have prepared one question for the audience, as we know that there are many representatives also from the Southeast Asian region. So we have one question in Mentimeter that if you wish, we can use while people think about doubts or other question, as you.
Okay, so maybe let's display the question quickly.
Yes, so let me go back to the screen sharing. Share screen. Okay. So as we did before, you can simply go on menti.com, insert the code, and we would be interested also in hearing from you what is, in your experience, one of the main challenges in monitoring e-waste flows at transnational level. You can type your answer in Mentimeter and should appear. We understand this is a very specific topic, so I don't know if all of you have already worked with data on e-waste, but for those who did work, we can see that you are experiencing the same challenges. So access, how it's difficult to access data, lack of data sharing.
So
Indeed.
we can see a trend in the Mentimeter already.
Indeed. Maybe I can, while people are typing, I can clarify something that I forgot to clarify when explaining about the methodology, because those who are working with data and HS code in Comtrade, of course, know that recently it has been introduced a specific code referring to e-waste. Of course, this study refers to 2019, which means that that type of code was not analyzed because it was not there yet. So in our case, what we did was to look at the HS codes relevant to EEE products, so new products, but we did a price analysis. So we only consider those products under a certain average price, which means, according to our methodology, that if the price is so low, they can be considered either as used electronics or already e-waste. So of course, this is an estimation, but it's the methodology that we used. Insufficient enforcement by the authorities, undocumented, uncontrolled, and illegal movements. Yeah, absolutely. We agree. Access to information from other countries. Maybe another thing that we can mention is also the consistency among data. When we did analyze data from the Basel Convention, one main challenge was that some countries are not reporting, of course. So in that case, data are definitely lacking. But in other cases, there is inconsistency simply because different countries may use different or not correct codes for reporting e-waste, which make our life as data analysts a bit more difficult. So this is also probably another aspect that should be yeah, improved. Okay, yeah. I think there is one hand raised.
Yeah,
Hello.
Rocky, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Alina and Elise, for that presentation. I just have one question. You mentioned that in the challenges for Southeast Asia, there's an absence of specific e-waste legislation. Can I just ask, like, what methodology do you use to identify what an e-waste legislation is? And if any, do you have the database in your report on what these e-waste legislations are in Southeast Asia as well?
Yes, I can answer it then, Elise, if you want to add. But what we did for our global e-waste monitor was to collect data information through survey and national authorities on existing legislation, but also on a broader scope regulation and policies existing at national level. It can be the implementation, for instance, on international regulation like the Basel, the Rotterdam, the Stockholm Convention, or it can be referred to specific policies. So indeed, also what we mention as general data at global level, the fact that 30% of the population is not covered by any e-waste legislation is referring to this specific data set we have and that we did collect through both desk review and interviews with national authorities. With regard to Southeast Asia, we are now actually, for the purpose of the Unwaste project, preparing a similar tool, a similar instrument, a survey to gather data with relevant authorities. So we are trying also to refine data and information on the legal coverage on Southeast Asia, also thanks to the Unwaste project. So hopefully we will be able also to share more detailed results in the coming months, probably beginning of next year.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much for the questions right now, because I think there are lots of questions, and also in the Menti a lot of a lot of points that actually are overlapping with the work that is done by Unwaste project, by UNODC in collaboration with UNITAR and UNEP. And we also wanted to mention that there is a publication, quarterly publication that's put together by UNITAR and UNODC, where calling it quarterly bulletins on transporting alert, and I will let maybe Florian to talk a little bit more about it. Next edition will be dedicated to e-waste. Elena, Elise, and their colleagues, they started working on it already. So Florian, please go ahead and tell us about it.
Yes, thank you. This is an excellent transition. So the Unwaste Transporting Alert is it's a quarterly bulletin that we publish so every 3 months. The first one was published in July, and the next one is going to be published in October. So in these alerts, we share updates on waste trafficking, policy developments, and other waste flows between the EU and Southeast Asia. So on the screen, you have a QR code that you can scan to sign up to the next alert. I really encourage you to do it. It's really interesting. I'm also sharing in the chat the link to the previous one, as well as the link to register in case you cannot scan the one on the screen. So this is, as Joanna said, it's produced in cooperation with UNITAR, UNODC and UNITAR. Yes, really encourage you to read it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Flo, and thank you again, Elena and Elise, for a very interesting presentation. Thanks everyone for joining. We still have 5 minutes for questions if anyone wants to make any interventions. No, as we are hearing, I don't see any hands. I don't see any other questions in the chat. So thank you so much. Please follow the Mobilize platform. You are going to make the announcements for future webinars on this platform, and keep in touch and feel free to contact Elena and Elise regarding specific questions for this webinar, or myself and Florian for any questions related to Unwaste projects. And if you have any ideas of future exchanges on the Mobilize platform or future webinars, we'd be happy to hear from you. Thanks a lot and have a wonderful day or evening or afternoon, depending on where you are. Thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.